This is Gemara Zevachim, Daf Mem Hey. We're holding a Mem Dalar Mabeis. We pulled up a little bit short, about 20 lines from the bottom, right after the two dots. First word on line is Afilu LeKodesh. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Oimer. We like all the learning once again to be an incredible Schos Refuah Shalema for Gavriel Simcha ben Miriam Ahuva. The incredible Koyach HaTorah should continue bringing the ultimate refuahs to Gavriel Simcha ben Miriam Ahuva b'Seich Sha'ar Chayli Yisrael. Says the Gemara, continuing on the journey of Pigol, and now we turn our attention to the end of the Mishnah, which is Pigol as it relates to Karbanos brought on the Mizbeach HaPenimi, in which they are not consumed by man, but rather they are consumed by the Mizbeach. So says the Braisa Tanya of Lezer Mishum Yosei Glili, Pigol b'davar anase b'chotz. If someone had a machshavas pigol, something that is done outside of the Beis HaMikdash, pigel, it makes a pigol. B'davar anase b'ifnim, something that is done inside the Beis HaMikdash, loy pigel. So when he's standing in the chutzner and he says, I am performing a shchita on a carbon with the mindset, the machshava, the das, to perform the hazah, the zrika of the dam, when lemachar. On the Mizbeach HaPenimi, loy pigel, there is no pigel. Why? Shemachshava b'achotz b'davar anase b'fnim loy pigel. Someone has a machshava outside in the chutzner with regard to something done inside the zrika on the Mizbeach HaPenimi that does not affect pigel. Continues the Braisa, but what happens? Ayomid b'fnim v'yamar harini mazeh amanas lahakter emurim. So when he's standing inside and says, I'm performing the hazah, amanas lahaktir emurim, condition to burn the emurim, and v'lishvach shirayim lemachar, and to pour the dam on mizbeach achitzayin lemachar. So now the case has been swapped. Says the Braisa, loy pigel. Why? Shemachshava b'fnim b'davar anase b'achotz, because this is a machshava inside the Beis HaMikdash with regard to avodah done outside the Beis HaMikdash, and that also does not create pigel. Case number 3, aval. However, when he's standing outside and he says, I'm doing the shchita to pour the shirayim tomorrow, outside, so the machshava is outside. For an avodah that is on the mizbeach achitzayin, then it indeed creates pegel. Why? 10 lines to the bottom. The first one line is shemachshava. Says the Braisa, shemachshava b'achotz v'ranasa b'achotz, because this is a machshava b'achotz for an avodah that is done b'achotz, which does indeed affect pegel. Where does this halacha come from? Amar Rav Yishua ben Levi, my karak asher yuram mishar zevach hashlamim. Says the Torah, it will be yuram, it will be separated from the carbon of the shlamim. What do we learn from the shlamim of the bull with regard to that which is not explicit in the Torah? We create a hekish from the power of the Kohen Mashiach to the shar of the Zevach HaShlamim, both bulls. Klape, the din of pegel. That what? Ma shar Zevach HaShlamim. Just like the shar of the Zevach HaShlamim, there's no pegel until what? 5 lines from the bottom. Until both the Maisa and the Machshava is b'achotz. Avar koin Mashiach at Shumai Machshavaisa v'Maisa v'Mazbeach achitzayin. And this is where we learn that both the Machshava and the Maisa has to be for an Avodah and has to be performed bachutz. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravu, Amar Rav, 2 lines in the bottom, halacha, Rav Elazar, Sham Yisham, Rav Yosi. This is the halacha. Amar Rava, says Rava, as we turn over to Memei Amar Aleph, Hilchasa, L'Mashicha. What do you mean? You're coming along and you're telling us, by the way, this is how we paskin. But what relevance today is it that we paskin this way? Says Rashi, Hari Kavlan Halacha Tzricha Loili Moisa Mashiach. What are you coming along and telling us this is how we paskin? Almost like giving us a place to hang our hat on. But it's not relevant. There's no Beis HaMikdash right now. Amrle Abaye. Responds Abaye in the top line of Memheam and Aleph El Me'ata. Kol Shchitas Kachim Lo Lisni. The entire Shchitas Kachim we shouldn't learn. Why? Because what are we doing here learning Zevachim? What's the purpose? Daf Yomi should have stopped and go back to brachos. So rather, why are we doing it al droish v'kabel schar? You know what the reason is? We're learning Torah lishma. We're learning Torah so that we get schar. Hachinami droish v'kabel schar. So says Rava, no, that wasn't my kasha. Hachi kamin alacha. Hilchasa lamali. I was asking, why do you have to say it's a hilchasa? Hilchasa connotes that it's a something that's lamaisadik. Leshnachrina amalei halacha kamina. Rava said, are you telling me this is the halacha? So that is what the discussion was. So vada, of course, is a purpose in learning over here. Of course, we are learning something which is relevant one day, hopefully mamish today, l'mashicha, but it calls man that it's not. It's a droish v'kabel schar. It's a Torah that we learn to get schar, and also we all know that learning about the karbanos, Chazal teach us, we view it as if we're bringing their karbanos by learning about it. So hopefully that as well. Says the Mishnah, Memhei Amar Aleph, Kodshei oivdei chavim, Kodshim of goyim, ein chayavim aleihem misham pigol. A carbon of a guy, there is no kares of pigol, nicer vitame, v'hashoichton b'achotz, and so that shechsem outside the Beis HaMikdash, Potter Devi Rabbi Shimon, whereas Rabbi Yosi is machayev like a regular carbon. So says the Gemara, let's dive a bit deeper, 8 lines down, right after the Mishnah, Memhei Amar Aleph, into the halachais of a carbon of a guy. Tanurabanan, kache of the gachavim, a carbon of a guy, loy nanin, veloy mayalim. One cannot get benefit, nor is there mi'ilah if you get benefit. Generally, the halacha is that if one benefits from a carbon, one benefits from kachim, from Beis HaMikdash, he's over an iser, he's over mi'ilah. A carbon of a guy, says the Gemara, there's no such mi'ilah. Similarly, and there's no tamura, which is that when you switch the kedusha from one item to the next, they both retain the sanctity. And you can't bring the nesachim from such a carbon. Aval, however, carbonon, their carbonos, the carbon of a guy, ta'on nesachim, divri Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon learns that they indeed require nesachim. Not like a yid in which the nesachim are voluntary, that the guy cannot do. However, when the guy brings a carbon oila, there are nesachim that are brought with it, like every carbon oila. Rav Yosi, Raya ani bekulam lahachmir. Says Rav Yosi, I hold that in all these cases you have to be machmir and treat the carbon like that of a yid. Shenemar bohen, it says klapi the carbon of a guy lahashem. So it says Rav Yosi, it gets the same halachas of a yid carbon. Continues the Gemara, explaining Shitas of Shimon, in which it's not the same, in which, like our Mishnah said, the carbon of the first sheet of the Mishnah, carbon of a guy does not have pickle noiser tame, but medvar murim bekachim mizveach avakachim b'tikabayis mayalin bahem. If a guy designates something to the Beis Hamikdash, then there would be me'ilah if such an entity was misused. Says the Gemara, about 15 lines down, the Gemara mila chet mitruma, tibetshuma ksiv b'nei Yisrael. So there's no me'ilah from the Gzeir Shava of chet, and just like by truma it says a yid, so too by all kachim. Continues the Gemara, my time. Does he pickle up and me nicer? Was he nicer? Mitama. So we see that the Torah certain times explicates that it's dafka by yid, and via Gzeir Shava we apply it to all other halachas. Continues the Gemara, the second half of the the two dots, vein isin temura, and they don't create a matzav of Tumura. My time, but this kish Tumura the Meiser Behema. Meiser Behema is kish the Meiser Dagon. Meiser Dagon. Ksivnei Yisrael v'lay Akum. So again, the fact that the Torah writes Bnei Yisrael by Meiser Dagon brings us up to Meiser Behema, which brings us up to the din of Tumura. Ask the Gemara, wait, as we saw a few days ago, how could that which you're learning go and teach something else? There's an extra step over here. Says the Gemara, Meiser Dagon, Chulinu, Meiser Dagon is not considered kachim, and therefore this two-step hekish is allowed to be learned. Ha, Nicha says, Marlamandam Basar Milamid Azlinan. Elamandam Basar Lamad Azlinan, Michael and Neymar. It's machlek is how you view such a hekish. Elamais Behema, Chayva Shin Kavu Lazmanu, Chayva Shin Kavu Lazmani Yisrael, Maisi. That the reason being that the category that we're discussing is what a chayva shein kavua lazman, and such a category is not shaykh to the goyim. Continues the Gemara, vein mevi in the Zevachim, continuing the next part of the Brisa, that a guy cannot bring the Zevachim as an adava voluntarily. Tana Rabbanan Ezrach says the Torah. Ezrach, a resident, literally, maybe Nisachim, Veinakam, maybe Nisachim, Yachaloteya, Lasai Tuna Nisachim. So, if the guy can't bring Nisachim, maybe even the oil of a guy doesn't have Nisachim together with it. Says Gemara, no, Tamlemer Kacha, that Avada, the oil of a guy has Nisachim, but they can't bring their own Nisachim voluntarily. Amr Rav Yossi Arni B'Kulun Achron Merum B'Kachim Mizveah V'Chulu. My time. What is the reason of Rav Yossi that we're differentiating between Kachim B'Di Kabayis and regular Kachim Mizbeach? Kasarvar Ki Gamra Mila Chet Mitshuma Dum Yiditshuma. Because he says go into the Gzeir Shava, go deeper into Chet. It has to be mamish like Truma. The Kedusha Zagof, it's inherently the Kedusha Zagof. Avakachim B'Di Kabayis, the Kedusha Damim Loi, and that's where he gets the differentiation, because the root Hakish is only by something with Kachay Haguf. Tanarab on in the last line. Dan Shinizma Vizarku Vishoigeg. Dam of a carbon became Tame Vizarku. But either way, once it's Tame, you're not supposed to do this Riko. You're not supposed to throw the dam in the Vizech. But he did. What's the din? Vishoigeg Hurtza. The carbon is accepted, and the meat and the basar will be eaten. That's only if it's Vishoigeg, as we turn over to Memhea Midbeis. But Bemezid, Loi Hurtza, the carbon does not work. Din Derabana, that you can't eat the meat. When it comes to a tzibur, then even Bemezid, the meat could be consumed. Uba'akum, and as it relates to the carbon of a guy, says the Gemara, Bein b'shagig, 3 lines down, Memheim b'beis, Bein b'meizid loy hurtza. Both ways it does not work. Amur Rabbanon, Kamei the Rabba, Bakiman. Who does this go like? To like Rav Yossi? Dear Rav Yossi, Hamar b'kulani ro'el hachmir. So it doesn't fit with Rav Yossi. Amar Lu Rav Papa. I feel like Rav Yasi could be Rav Yasi. Why? Shiny awesome there is different. Amar Cross says the Torah lahem la'akum, a special drasha. Amar Rav Huna B'Rav Nasser Rav Papa l'meyatav, that is true. Hashem makdishim achnami heim v'lo yakum. Amar Rav Ashi Amar Cross l'ratzayin lahem v'akum la v'nei artzah. And the fact that it says l'ratzayin lahem shows us that it cannot apply to a goy. We continue with the Mishnah, a third of the way down, Memhei Amid Beis. It continues the Mishnah discussing cases of pigol that will not carry the classical karis. Says the Gemara, Dvarim she'ein chayavim alei misham pigol. Things that you're not chayav for pigol, chayav la misham neiser, misham tamei. You could yes be chayav for neiser and tamei. Chutz min adam. Shem chayav davar shedarkan lechol. Aval ha'etzim alvayna v'aktariyos. Ain't a chayav in a love, misham tuma, says Shitas Rev Shimon. So where does this come from? That the pigol will yes apply. Tana Rabbanan says the Gemara, Yachlo yechayavim misham tuma, ela davar sheish lo matirin. I would think that the only chayav of tuma is something that could be rectified. Davar sheish lo matirin. Bein la adam bein mizvech. But then it would make sense. Uma pigol shu b'kviyah, obi yediyah achas. And yet, ever it's going to be matir. That's the only time it applies. And so the Gemara proves that it'll apply to both. So says the Torah that eating so that someday applies only that which is kadosh to me, which shows us that all karbanos, even if it's not something that it's in davar sheish lo matirin, has the isser, etc. Says the Gemara, Yachal, I would think miyad. I would think that this isser is right away from the moment you're makdish it to the Beis Hamikdash. Tamalama yikrav. Says the Torah, yikrav. Only then will it have this kares. Let's stop over here. I'll pick it up from here. As the Gemara will delve deeper into this brisa. Psiyata dishmaya.